afternoon and welcome. My name is Michelle Brooks Rolling, and I'm the Executive Director of the Upstate Minority Economic Alliance, Central New York's Regional Minority Chamber of Commerce. UMEA is pleased to co-host this webinar presented by the U.S. Small Business Administration's Upstate New York District Office, along with our partners, the Wise Women's Business Center and the Better Business Bureau of Upstate New York. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on businesses, particularly small businesses, has been utterly devastating. The objective of today's webinar is to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses are at the forefront of applying for federal stimulus relief aid. With that, Melanie McGovern, Better Business Bureau's Communications Director, will be curating your questions in the chat box today. And it is my pleasure to introduce my longtime associate, Megan Farkowski, Director of the Wise Women's Business Center, who will introduce our main guest presenter. Megan?
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you, partners, for coming on board. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over a couple of administrative notes for you. First, as Michelle mentioned, Melanie is taking care of a lot of the questions for us today, and she'll be curating those not via chat, but via the Q&A function. So this is a little bit different. We are in webinar mode, and you'll be using the Q&A function to put in any questions that you may have. The formal presentation will take about 35 minutes, and after the presentation is over, we will do our best to answer any questions that have come in via the Q&A if we don't address those during. Feel free to reach out to your host organizations after the webinar with any additional questions that you may have. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dan Rickman. Dan is the Deputy District Director of the U.S. Small Business Administration here in Syracuse. He and his team, I've been watching it on the sidelines to a degree. They've been working fast and furiously, and we're so appreciative of their support to stay on top of everything related to the Paycheck Protection Program and the many other programs that the U.S. Small Business Administration is administering right now. So Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Megan, and appreciate you guys putting this together. You know, we often say at SBA we're nothing without our partners, right? And I think we've got a long history of certainly with the Wise Women's Business Center, but also with UMEA and the Better Business Bureau. You know, I feel like this is our, I don't know how many webinars we've done to date, going back to the launch of the CARES Act, but thank you for putting this together. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here for you guys, and we'll get going with this. And we're sharing screen 1, 2, no, 3. I have 3 screens. Okay, here we go. Okay. Stand by for just a second. Here we go. Okay. All right. So without further ado, today we're here to talk primarily about the Paycheck Protection Program, the most recent round that was updated and reauthorized by the Economic Aid Act that was passed near the end of September. I know that folks probably on the line have a lot of questions about a couple of the other programs that were either created or refunded by the Economic Aid Act, including the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, as well as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance Program. I will qualify in advance. I promise we'll give you the updates that we have to date. But please understand that those programs have not been launched yet. They're still in development. and there's still pretty limited information. So I'm not sure, how in depth we're going to be able to get into today. But we will be able to get into, particularly via the Q&A, some depth with the Paycheck Protection Program. So this presentation, this is current as of January 14th, as you see in the slide here. So we were provided with this by the good folks up in Washington, D.C. And I want to kind of emphasize that, a lot of what we're going to discuss, this is, as of at least the material on the slide, January 14th, or at least the most current information that's available to our knowledge as of today, January 19th. So I think it's fair to say that, much like with the first round of PPP, guidance will develop over time, and anything where it's if we don't have a specific answer right now, some of it may become clear. If there's any circumstances where I say something that's inconsistent with I don't know, an interim final rule or an FAQ on our website, the stuff on our website wins. Okay, so with that qualifier out of the way, I think talk a little bit about the past, where we are today, before we get into what we're now calling first draw PPP loans, second draw PPP loans, some updates to the forgiveness, and some of the additional resources and conversation on the SVO and EIDL Advance. Okay. Moving on, where we are today, Congress intended this round of PPP to increase access to COVID relief funds for the hardest hit small businesses. Okay, that includes, I think folks in this call will appreciate, underserved segments, business demographics, women in business, minorities, veterans, and businesses located in low income areas. So SBA did a couple of things, as with the launch of this round of PPP, that included an exclusive period for loan applications from community financial institutions, which serve underserved companies, leveraging our lender match platform to direct borrowers to opportunities from PPP lenders in those areas. With respect to the EIDL Advance, we'll touch on that at the end. Congress put in rules to target some of those funds to low-income businesses located in low-income areas, I should say, as well as businesses that have, had significant revenue losses as a result of the pandemic. You can see here kind of a bit of a timeline. It actually opened up last week on January 11th for the community financial institutions I just mentioned. SBA defined community and financial institutions as community development financial institutions, CDFIs. Many credit unions, for example, are CDFIs. Minority depository institutions, SBA certified development companies, and SBA microloan intermediary lenders. So those folks had the first option for first draw PPP loans last week. Second draw PPP loans opened up on January 13th. Just this past Friday, for first and second draw applications open to banks and lending institutions with billion or less in assets, so small community banks generally and credit unions. And today, PPP opened up for all other participating lending institutions. So the applications are available to all, certainly all PPP lenders that participated in the first round of PPP starting last spring and through the summer while PPP was open. Those folks were automatically able to sign up to be PPP lenders for this round, and SBA is still accepting applications for new PPP lenders even today. Okay, I will say that in addition to the phased rollout for the Paycheck Protection Program funds, SBA also created a bit of a new process on the lender side to add additional compliance checks up front for banks when they submit applications to ensure that well, protect both lenders and borrowers and the federal government with the initial PPP applications. So I think we expect those loans. SBA expects the funds to last a little bit longer than the first round as a result of some of those back end things that we put in place. So, and of course, it's our hope that that leads to more access to these critical funds for, you know, folks that need it. And to really drive the point home, in the first round of PPP, when a lender submitted, you know, their approved loan, because SBA, you know, the lenders approve the PPP loans and simply submit it to SBA for a loan number, that was essentially an instant process. Now, when the lender submits that approved application to SBA, it is not instant. You know, it can be anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, if not longer, if there's any issues with that application. So that's definitely going to slow the roll of the applications, probably quite significantly. So what is a first draw PPP loan? Okay, so first draw PPP loan is essentially a loan to any eligible entity that did not already get a PPP loan prior to August 9th, when the initial PPP authorization expired. Okay, certainly there were any of a number of businesses that either were not eligible to apply for whatever reason. The Economic Aid Act did expand eligibility to certain types of entities, which we'll cover in a sec. A couple other things that were updated by the Economic Aid Act was to increase the types of expenses that can be considered eligible uses of funds for the Paycheck Protection Program loan proceeds. Borrowers can now, as you know, specifically codified in our interim final rules, select any covered period between 8 and 24 weeks to use the PPP loans. You know, this is simply probably putting into practice what was put into effect by the PPP Flexibility Act last June that made the 24-week covered period option available. And I should point out that when we say that they can select a covered period, that's after disbursement. Okay, so you don't have to commit when you apply for the PPP loan to an 8-week or a 12-week or whatever. Okay, it simply means that, you know, after 8 weeks, if you've already used the funds and you're eligible for forgiveness, you can apply in the 9th week, right? Or you're halfway through it, you're at 12 weeks and you're ready to apply for forgiveness because you've used the funds and you're eligible for forgiveness, you can apply at that point, all the way up to the 24 weeks. Okay, so it's very flexible in that respect. I guess the takeaway for first draw PPP loan versus the original PPP is nothing was really taken away. Largely, you know, it is calculated similarly. How to calculate the loan amount is similar with a couple of exceptions, but it was made a little bit better. Okay. Again, directly as a result of the legislation, the Economic Aid Act. Last thing to keep in mind is, you know, the application window is open until March 31st of 2021. So it's a bit of a shorter window this time around for making the loan application. And that applies to both the first draw and second draw PPP loans. Okay. In terms of loan eligibility, the first draw PPP loan eligibility, there are some new types of entities that are now eligible. Includes housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, certain 501c6 organizations such as chambers of commerce, specifically those that there is a requirement when we say certain 501c6 organizations, we're talking about those that are not primarily engaged in lobbying activities. So if your organization receives 15% or more percent of your receipts from lobbying activities, or 15% of your activities are devoted to lobbying activities, you would not be eligible as a 501c6 organization. So as long as you're below that 15%, you're in good shape. Certain eligible news organizations and even certain government-owned hospitals are now eligible. No changes were made, to prior eligibility. So, certainly any otherwise eligible small business, sole proprietor, self-employed, 501c3s, 501c19s, all those things on the list there. Subject to the size standards that SBA that already exist for concern. So depending on your NAICS code, NAICS code, which could be based on your revenues or number of employees. You have to be considered small, right, if you're a for-profit concern. Or if you don't meet that standard, and you have to have no more than 500 employees or fewer, okay, with the first draw PPP loan eligibility. That there's no change, that has not been a change in that from the first round. And that does include, all affiliated entities. So if you're, if you're an organization that is, fairly large, approaching 500 employees, and you have multiple entities or locations or what have you, we're looking at all of those. Okay, we call it affiliation, and those rules still apply to the Paycheck Protection Program. Something to keep in mind. Now, what is a second draw PPP loan? Okay, so this was specifically created by the Economic Aid Act, and there are some differences between a first draw PPP loan and a second draw PPP loan. First of all, there's an additional check for eligibility. Okay, and that is a 300 employee or fewer rule. Okay, so Congress chose to lower the threshold for the number of employees. Fairly considerable amount to 300 employees or less. And then again, that is an aggregate for all entities, except for circumstances that were, certain types of applicants, such as restaurants, NAICS Code 72 industries, we're looking at per location. Additionally, a business must be able to demonstrate that they've suffered a 25% reduction in gross receipts. What does a 25% reduction in gross receipts mean? Well, we're looking at it either year over year, okay? So comparing 2019 gross receipts, gross revenues to 2020 gross revenues. If you suffered a 25% decline, then you would be eligible. You can also compare quarter to quarter, like quarters. So you could look at Q3 2019, compare Q3 2020 as an example. If you were not fully in operations for all of 2019, you could compare, the quarter that you began in operations and compare that to quarters in 2020. If you started your business in January 1st of 2020, there's a way to calculate the revenue reductions, comparing Q1 2020 to any other quarter in 2020. Bottom line, there's a lot of different scenarios. I'll show you guys where to find this stuff on our website in terms of how to see what applies to your situation. Okay. In terms of calculating the maximum loan amount for a second draw PPP loan, it wasn't any of the previous slides, but with first draw, it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. Okay, up to 10 million. With second draw PPP loans, it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, up to 2 million. Okay, so the maximum loan amount was decreased for a second draw PPP loan. And you'll see on the slide here that it says you can rely on either 2019 or 2020 payroll costs. Okay, so that may certainly be a benefit to businesses that perhaps were not fully operational in 2019. Now they can refer to their 2020 payroll for computing their loan amount, which might be helpful to a lot of folks. Same applies to sole proprietors. You can look at net income for 2019 or 2020 to calculate your owner's compensation as part of the PPP loan. One exception to the 2.5 times is going to be for borrowers in NAICS Code 72 industries, accommodation and food services sector. The maximum loan amount for second draw is 3.5 times their average monthly payroll. Those in businesses in that sector are considered to have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. So Congress added that rule to the PPP loan. There's a different application too. So with the second draw PPP loan application, these various eligibility and requirements are specified as part of the loan application. And again, I'll show you guys where to find that. So you can start working on your loan as you're getting ready to apply to your lender. The other thing to keep in mind for a second draw PPP loan is that you must have received a first draw PPP loan. And further, if you have received a first draw PPP loan, you have to have used or will use all of your first draw PPP funds prior to getting a second PPP loan dispersed, and be able to demonstrate that you've used all of those first draw funds for eligible expenses. Essentially, if you still have PPP funds available, there can't be a need for a second draw at that point, right? You have to have used all of your first draw funds, again, for eligible expenses only. What has not changed with either first draw or second draw PPP loans is that you must use 60% of the funds for payroll to be eligible for 100% forgiveness. So otherwise, with the balance of the use of funds up to 40%, you may use the PPP funds for those eligible expenses that we mentioned, such as mortgage interest, rent, utilities, and as added by the Economic Aid Act, certain other eligible expenses that include property damage due to civil unrest, expenses related to worker protection, and other operating expense and supplier costs, which we expect to see some more detail on when the FAQs on our website are updated. But very clearly, expenses related to COVID compliance, if you will, worker and customer safety, those types of expenses seem to be pretty clearly eligible uses of funds. Okay. I'll point out one other thing, and mainly because we've kind of gotten this question quite a bit, and you don't see anything in here on being eligible for forgiveness or for forgiveness, having been applied for or received as an eligibility requirement for the second draw PPP loan. You only have to have used the funds for eligible expenses. Okay. Theoretically, you could not have any payroll, but if you spent all of your PPP first round funds on rent, well, rent's an eligible expense, right? So you would be eligible for a second draw. So how much you may or may not have received for forgiveness is not relevant for the second draw, only that you've used it. Okay. And of course, the other couple of eligibility criteria repeated here. In terms of PPP loan forgiveness, couple of changes again as a function of the Economic Aid Act. What hasn't changed is you apply for forgiveness with the lender you receive the funds from. Okay. Once you've submitted your forgiveness application, the lender then in turn submit the forgiveness decision to SBA for review. So the process does begin, your PPP process begins with the lender of your choice and ends with that same lender. Okay. The updates included a big one from the Economic Aid Act, and that included the eliminating the requirement that economic injury disaster loan advances be deducted from forgiveness. That was a requirement of the CARES Act, and that requirement has been eliminated. That also means that any business that has already received forgiveness and for whom an advance was deducted, SBA is going to make it right, essentially. SBA is going to, go through, and for any forgiveness application that had that amount deducted, which would have left you with a loan, right, equal to that amount for your PPP loan with your lender, and SBA will, pay the difference along with any accrued interest from, that balance, and remit those funds to the bank and provide the bank with instructions for, remitting that. If there is a balance, if there is not a balance remaining, certainly submitting a refund to the borrower. You may have already paid the loan, for example. So it'll be up to the bank to return funds. So you don't have to apply to have your, forgiveness payment, forgiveness reconciled. SBA is going to do it automatically. Don't have a timeline yet. Certainly the procedures are still in development, but it'll happen automatically on the lender side. Another big change was the tax treatment of the expenses that you use the PPP loan on. Okay. The IRS issued a rule after the first one that, while the forgiveness amount is not taxable income, it was treated as income, right? It just wasn't taxable income. And there was a prior rule that required that, you could not deduct something that you got free money for, to paraphrase. Congress chose to eliminate that requirement as well. So the forgiveness funds are not treated as income. And the expenses that you paid those funds with are also now tax deductible. Okay, and I'm sure IRS is going to be coming out with a guidance, any day now. Okay, so sure, more to come on that, but I think it's a pretty significant change. The last thing is a simplified forgiveness process or application is going to be implemented for PPP loans under 150,000. So SBA already has one in place right now. So if you're applying for forgiveness on your first PPP loan right now, there's already a simplified forgiveness process for loans under 50,000. There's going to be procedures in place and a simplified process for these larger loans. Coming soon, it says. So it means it has not been published yet. Okay, in terms of what to do now, okay? So step one is, if you have a relationship with a lender, reach out to your lender, whether you're looking for a first draw or second draw, that is where the process starts. It's the lenders that make the PPP loans, okay? So you can call them up and ask them if they're a participating PPP lender or if they plan to be one. Their portal may not be open up yet. Lenders may have their own portals that they use. They may be. I'm hearing anecdotally that they're opening up by the minute, it seems like, across the country. If you don't have a lender that you have a relationship one, you can find one. Our website has a tool called Lender Match, which you can see the link for here, SBA.gov/Lender Match. And essentially you kind of type in, the create a profile, type in the request, and local lenders participating in PPP will then reach out to you. So it's literally matchmaking, okay? For the most up-to-date information, again, our website is the source. Shortcut to get to the PPP page is SBA.gov/PPP. That's where you can get the most up-to-date rules and FAQs and applications and all that stuff. For assistance with just your business in general, but certainly for preparing to apply for a PPP loan or to ask questions or help with forgiveness applications, SBA has a lot of we have a lot of resource partners, of which capital R, capital P, of which the Wise Women's Business Center is one. They're not the only one. So I'd be remiss if I didn't point out we have a local small business development center as part of a statewide network here in New York State. We have a local SCORE chapter, which is another organization that SBA works with to help small businesses directly for free, in particular for one-on-one assistance. And you can find, the nearest one wherever you're tuning in from at SBA.gov/local assistance. So my district covers about 2/3 of the state. There might be some overlap. We actually have 3 districts in our state: Western New York, Buffalo District, and the New York City office. So you can find that, closest SBA partner that will help you for free via that location on our website. Okay, and of course you can follow us on Twitter and sign up for updates. And here's our information at the bottom of the page. So one more thing before we open up for questions. I promise I was going to show you all these things at our website, and I haven't forgotten about the EIDL Advance or the Shuttered Venue Operators grant yet. Okay, so on our page, our website, SBA.gov, we've got our coronavirus relief option. So if you navigate, there's a banner at the top of our website. When you go to SBA.gov, you click here, you can select these relief options. Okay, they summarize it here. But if you go to relief options, it takes you to this page. Look for the guy in the denim shirt, at least for now. And you can kind of navigate to some of these, core COVID-19 relief funding programs. Okay, with the Paycheck Protection Program, this is where you go if you type in SBA.gov/PPP. Okay, this may look a little bit different for folks that hit refresh on our website often. The PPP page has been broken up based on the subject matter: first draw, second draw, forgiveness, etc., as opposed to what previously was a kind of an infinite scroll thing. But you can navigate to view the details. Okay, there's a table of contents, how and when to apply, and links to lender match here. You can also view all lenders near you on a map. Okay, if you don't want to do the matchmaking thing, you can just call around. A little more details about the loan, amount, interest rate, those sorts of things. I didn't get to it in too much detail, because largely this information hasn't changed. If anybody's interested, you can Q&A us, and I'll dig deeper. Some of the, how to calculate a first draw PPP loan amount and what documentation to provide. That would probably be a very helpful link. This has been updated as of January 17th. I think you can still rely, to a certain extent on some of the more kind of nuanced things in the FAQs. They haven't yet been updated. I know they're working to update them. So in those circumstances, you want to rely on the rules as they are. The borrower application also, speaks to a lot of the different nuances of, eligibility and the loan amount and that sort of thing. Similarly with the second draw PPP loan, it focuses on that. You can review the PPP second draw borrower application form that was recently published, how to calculate the second draw loan amount. All of those nuanced details are available right here. So I'm not going to go through all of these because I think you probably all can click through a website too. I do want to discuss EIDL and SVO here in a moment. Let's start with SVO. So the SVO grant program, Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, is intended to be, for venues that have been, have received significant revenue losses. So this program is not live yet. So And we have not been provided with any due dates, timelines to date. This program is brand new and is still being developed. Okay. Couple of takeaways, okay, is that, you must have been in operation prior to February 29th, okay, and you must not have received a PPP loan on or after December 27, 2020, okay. So if you did get a PPP loan in the first round last year, you're fine, okay, but you must not have received one, I guess what we're calling now either a first draw or second draw PPP loan. In fact, as part of the applications now is that, you certify for PPP that you have not and will not receive an SVO. Okay. Now that it's designed if you have not received a PPP loan. Doesn't mean you can't apply for a PPP loan technically. But something else to keep in mind is if you apply for a PPP loan, your lender is supposed to only keep that application live for 10 days. Okay, so if you get a PPP loan and gets an SBA loan number, the bank can only keep that PPP loan I guess in process, if you will, for a period of 10 days. Okay. Additionally, from when the SVO program launches, there's going to be phases. Okay, first priority for those funds are going to be entities that suffered a 90% or greater revenue loss between April 2020 and December 2020. That's a 2-week period, 14 days of grant awards. After that 14 days passes, if there's still funds available, second priority will kick in, and then on and on. Okay, so I guess there is no guarantee of funding, and at this point we couldn't possibly predict what's going to happen since this is a brand new thing. This is for all of these initial phases are for businesses, entities up to 50 employees. Okay, got to get all the way to the unrestricted non-priority round before it opens up to other entities. So this page is all we have on this program at this point. And again, we could not possibly speculate on when it may open. Okay, but I think those are some of the top line takeaways. If you're interested in this program, and you're comparing it to PPP or not, I would encourage you to review this page thoroughly. For EIDL loans, economic injury disaster loans, and the EIDL Advance, the Economic Aid Act extended the deadline for economic injury disaster loans. If you have not applied for one yet, you may still apply. The terms for the EIDL loan, nothing was changed by the Economic Aid Act. Okay. If you already received an EIDL loan, you cannot reapply for a second EIDL loan. Okay. However, if you did not, I'm aware that many businesses requested a loan amount smaller than they were eligible for. In that circumstance, if you need additional funds, you can simply request a loan increase from disaster customer service. Okay, up to the amount that you could have received. Okay, so there is a bit of a remedy for that scenario. Now, the Economic Aid Act did provide additional funds to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance / grant with some specific criteria. So you'll see here probably somewhere, no longer available. You cannot apply for an Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance. Okay. What SBA is going to do is, again, per the Economic Aid Act, which required that advance recipients moving forward, be located in a low-income neighborhood, and second, demonstrate that they received or suffered a 30% or more loss in revenues over any 8-week period during the pandemic. So what's going to happen is, much like with the SVO program, there's going to be certain phases, okay? And this isn't on our website, but this is what we've learned to date. SBA is first going to target any advance recipient that did not receive the maximum $10,000. Congress instructed us to do so, and make up the difference. So SBA limited the first round of advance funds to $1,000 per employee, and in order to extend the advance funds to the largest number of businesses. So for example, if you only receive 2,000, you may be eligible to receive the additional 8 if you did not get the 10,000 initially. The way it's going to work is SBA is going to invite you to reach out directly to an advance recipient and invite you to confirm your address first, to determine or confirm that you are still in a low-income neighborhood. And if the answer is yes, you'll be invited to provide the revenue documentation to document your revenue decline of 30%. And then if you meet both of those checks, then you'll be able to get the difference up to the 10,000. Then SBA is going to go through all the prior EIDL applicants. So folks that applied for but did not receive the advance because the funds had been exhausted. And we'll do something similar. We'll reach out to those businesses and do a similar thing. Technically, funds permitting, at some point, the advance may open up to somebody that has not to date applied for an EIDL loan or an advance. I will say that I believe there's something on the order of 16 million EIDL loan applications last year. So this is all going to be dependent on funding. So the takeaway from this is it's not possible, again, to apply for these new EIDL advance funds. That those funds are going to be targeted to folks that have already applied, and you will not have to take any action until SBA invites you to do so. Okay. Otherwise, there's no significant changes in that respect.
Dan, I'm going to jump in real quick. It's Melanie.
Yeah.
A couple of people are asking about applying for this EIDL grant, but what you're referring to is people who got it before, correct?
It is not possible to apply now for this grant. You have to have already applied. Okay. And it's going to be a function of funds. So if you already applied and did not receive the funds, again, you would be in that second phase, right? And presumably, I don't know this, but presumably it would be an order of application, right? It would be prioritized based on when you applied at that point. And then, assuming you meet the requirements of being located in a low-income neighborhood and being able to demonstrate a 30% revenue decline. So last thing I want to touch on is for existing SBA loans. With the first round, SBA received funding to provide debt relief to make principal and interest payments on quote unquote normal SBA loans, 7A, 504, and micro loan business loans. For a period of 6 months. The Economic Aid Act included a new debt relief program with some additional restrictions, shorter timeline. You didn't have to do anything to benefit from this program the first time around, and you won't this time either. So this will just be a benefit where SBA makes your principal and interest payments when that goes live. I don't have a timeline on that yet either. SBA will provide instructions to lenders at that point, though. So I think that covers kind of the presentation piece. Now the fun part, okay, where you all asked me the questions that I avoided answering in my presentation.
You know, I got to tell you, I got through 26 of them on my own because you and I have been together a lot this year, virtually doing these presentations. So, you know, check your Q&A. I responded privately to some people if I didn't get enough detail in your question, or I might have sent you a link to go get the further information that was covered during the presentation. You know, regarding the Shuttered Venues grant, you know, we know that the PPP in some cases is not taxable revenue. Do we know that yet, with it being so new, if that's going to be taxable as well?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I would expect not, if it follows with the Advance, which is not taxable, and the Paycheck Protection Program, which is not taxable. I wouldn't expect that to be the case, but and to be frank, it may be in the legislation, and I miss it in the however many pages. You know, and until we're closer to becoming live and we see all the details and the nuances, it's don't know yet.
And again, I don't know if this was mentioned. If I don't ask your specific question, it's because the same question's been asked over and over and over again. But one of the questions that I've seen a few times is, do you have to apply for your forgiveness on your first PPP draw before you apply for your second draw?
No, you do not have to have applied for forgiveness. You simply must have used the funds. Okay. And be able to demonstrate that you use the funds for eligible expenses. Okay. So yeah, I guess strictly speaking, you should be ready to apply for forgiveness. Like those are, the timelines kind of match up, right? If you've used the funds, you're probably ready to apply for forgiveness. That process, it doesn't have to have taken place yet. You don't have to have applied or received it yet. Okay. But you will have to have the documentation. Okay. To prove that you be able to demonstrate. And I should say, I don't think I mentioned this in the presentation, for the application for the second draw, where you are, certifying that you've used the funds for eligible expenses. For loans under 150,000, you don't have to submit that with your loan application. However, you must be prepared to provide that information upon request from SBA. SBA does review PPP loans. A PPP loan, whether you've applied for forgiveness or not, is part of the normal practices to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. SBA samples PPP loans for review. So you should be able to provide the documentation. Similar with with the revenues, and be able to document your revenue decline, all of that stuff. Loans above 150,000, you have to produce that information. Okay, so I think when it comes to how to document, I think this is something. Well, certainly your accountant or financial services provider of choice can help you with that documentation. Certainly our resource partners are well equipped to advise. They're not going to prepare it for you because that's what accountants are for, but they can advise you on what might be appropriate for documentation. Whatever we're talking about. If we're talking about documenting you were in operation prior to February 15th, 2020, that's still a requirement. That wasn't changed. Okay. Documenting the revenues. Okay. Well, a shoebox of receipts probably isn't going to cut it. Okay. You're probably going to need a financial statement of some sort if you're looking at quarterly. If you're looking at the quarter-to-quarter revenues, maybe with corresponding bank statements to reconcile. A hand-drawn ledger. I don't know. Maybe you need something a little bit more. Okay. Certainly talk with your lender about that. Talk with one of our resource partners. There are some shortcuts if your business has to file for sales tax. Well, that's a document you're sending to a government agency that says, here are my revenues, right? And you can get that on a quarterly basis and provide that. That's pretty good, right? If you're looking at 2019 full year to full year 2020, well, Schedule C, you filed that with the IRS. That's pretty good, right? I'd take it. I'm not processing your application though, but as an example, these are some of the things that you can consider, okay? So any other ones you wanted me to highlight before I kind of try and scroll through here?
Well, I have like 3 or 4 questions about FTEs, so I'm going to combine them.
Okay.
People want to know if they need to bring all their employees back before they apply for their second round of PPP. Will they be penalized if they have less employees now than they did in the first draw? And is 40 hours still FTE per the application?
So I'll answer the last question first, okay? And the forgiveness application provides a couple of methods of calculating FTE. So I can't tell you that it's a 40 hours. There's actually, you know, you could just either count somebody as full-time or half-time, 1 or 0.5, regardless of the number of hours, okay? Or 40 or whatever. You should refer to the forgiveness application that provides those calculations for FTE. Your loan application does not ask you to calculate your FTE, okay? Your loan application only asks you how many employees you have. That's for eligibility purposes, okay? That's whole persons, okay? So when we talk about 300 employees or 500 employees, we're not talking about FTEs. When we're talking about eligibility, we're talking about the number of people that you employ, whether they work 1 hour for you or 100, okay? If you have one of each, that's 2, okay? So it's whole persons, which kind of answers the very first question, which is, you know, what am I being held accountable for? Well, you're being held accountable for maintaining employment over your covered period. So when you apply for forgiveness at the end of your covered period, which would be anywhere from 8 to 24 weeks, you would then have the I kept my employees over that period calculation, if you will. I'm summarizing lots of forms, but that's essentially what we're talking about, okay? So the answer is no. You know, for PPP second draw or whatever, okay, we're not looking back to January 15th, okay? You know, what it says on our website is that to maximize forgiveness, you must maintain employment during your covered period, okay? Keep and maintain your employees, right? Then, of course, at some point, you know, when you apply for forgiveness, depending on whether you are eligible for the simplified application or safe harbors that may, you know, that would be available, all that stuff is still kind of in conversation. I think our sense is the vast majority of applicants, even for forgiveness with the first round of PPP funds, were eligible for 100% forgiveness, whether they kept the same number of FTEs or not, because perhaps some safe harbor applied or they fell under the simplified application. So, you know, some of that is still in development for sure. You know, for the forgiveness with this new first draw, second draw stuff, but you know, generally, that's what we're talking about here, okay? If you can keep your employees, you're going to be in good shape. And if you have a small loan, you have even less to worry about, to be perfectly honest. And that was our experience in the first round, or the first round. Can we call it the first round? Last year with PPP.
I don't know what to call last year.
It's last year.
There's some folks I reached out to privately about your specific questions. We're going to get those answered offline, or some of them we could end up talking about for quite a bit of time, but there are a lot of really good questions I'm sending your way, Dan. So be prepared.
Okay.
All right, see, now I lost my place. So regarding the second draw, is there a time frame? A couple of people asked this question. To spend,
you must use it over your 8 to 24 week covered period. So you have 24 weeks maximum to use the funds, and whatever amount you use over that period would then be eligible for forgiveness. Okay. So this was, again, kind of implementing up front what was added in June with the PPP Flexibility Act, going back to ancient history of last summer. You now have that expanded flexibility over that entire period. Okay. Now you still have to spend 60% on payroll, okay, over that period, you know, to be eligible for forgiveness, but you do need to spend the money within that period, okay, up to 24 weeks. So again, you could use it all in 8 weeks, and if you use it eligibly, that's fine too, okay. So again, it's very, you know, it's quite flexible.
This is an interesting question, and I haven't seen this yet. This is only one person asking it, so we won't spend too much time. But if you're a sole proprietor and you took pandemic unemployment insurance, are you eligible for PPP now?
So good question. So, you know, strictly speaking, SBA has no rules with respect to unemployment assistance. You know, we that's a program administered by the states. Okay, so I think you can take that for what it's worth. If you know, our eligibility is what our eligibility is. Okay, it makes no mention of have you now or ever received pandemic unemployment assistance or anything to that effect. Okay, I think generally speaking, you know, it makes sense that if you're not receiving benefits right now, that, you know, it's probably okay. Okay, it's probably more in the reverse. Like if you were applying now for unemployment and simultaneously receive PPP funds to pay yourself, that would be different because, you know, you know, you're probably asserting to the state that you're not receiving employment compensation. If you have a Paycheck Protection Program, for your compensation, you are now receiving employment compensation, right? So it's more on the state side, not us. So I know it's kind of like a wishy-washy answer, but I hope that kind of makes sense. You nodded, that's good, okay.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I got a couple of questions about what if your bank doesn't take PPP applications, and then there was another question saying some banks aren't taking them anymore. So you can go to the SBA lender list, but some of these banks might not be taking applications. So where would a potential lender go to figure out which one is actually taking the applications?
Yeah. So we got the 2 links on the PPP page that I shared. You know, and there's quite a few. You know, you can call around. You know, there's certainly our experience with the first one. There was a number of online lenders, large ones, in fact. You know, I'm not endorsing Intuit. You know, was one. PayPal was another one. More local non-bank SBA lenders like Pursuit Lending, which is a statewide SBA lender, you know, was accepting applications online from all companies. If you know, you can identify those types of concerns on our website. So it may take a little bit of, you know, homework. If your particular bank that you would prefer to do business with isn't accepting it, but you know, they're out there.
You know, it's interesting. We have a lot of people asking about the SVOs. And, you know, one of them is it better to wait for SVO? And then what if you're denied, and can you still get PPP after that? Because, you know, you can't have both.
Yeah. So, you know, this is where, you know, I kind of dance around it a little bit. You know, I can't advise people on timing of benefits, right? Because I don't know when the SVO is going to open. I can only tell you this is how long the phases are going to go. And, you know, depending on when SVO opens, you know, if you're in the 6th round or 6th phase for SVO, you're talking 2 months from when it opens, right? PPP applications are only open until March 31st. We've got 10 weeks, 2.5 months. Not quite, 2.5 months. So will the money run out? Well, yes, eventually the money will run out. We don't know enough yet about the PPP to, you know, make any kind of predictions or trends yet, because it just opened up to the large banks today, right? I'm sure we'll be monitoring it closely, and as probably was the experience in the first round, certainly what our office will be doing is saying, you know, blasting to the world, hey, there's this much money left, PPP. You know what I mean? Like, we'll that's all we can do. I cannot like advise you on one versus the other. But if you are denied the SVO grant for whatever reason, or the funds expire, and PPP is still available before March 31st and those funds available, yes, you can apply for PPP at that point. To actually answer the question, but provide a lot of context wrapped around it.
The EIDL Advance, they don't have to apply for forgiveness for that. That's just a grant, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And EIDL, the L in EIDL stands for loan. And people keep asking if it's a grant, or they keep calling it a grant. And I keep seeing a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
So do you want to just really briefly talk about that?
Sure. So, and this is why I say advance, and then I say slash grant. The economic injury disaster loan is a loan with no anything else associated with it, no other adjectives or nouns or anything. Okay. It's a 30-year loan, for-profit 3.75%, interest rate, not-for-profit 2.75. That's it. Okay. There's nothing forgivable about it. And that program has existed for decades. CARES Act created the EIDL Advance, which theoretically was to get funds to businesses more rapidly, and that advance was not to be repaid. Therefore, it's a grant. Separate tracks, separate processes, separate programs, essentially, okay? The advance application was part of the loan application though. So you have to have applied for the EIDL loan to have been eligible for the advance. When you originally applied somewhere between April and mid-July, when the advance funds ran out, to apply for an advance. And there was like a page, after you did all the loan stuff, there was a page, I want the advance. You check the box, okay? And that is how you applied for the advance at that point. So I think that answered the question, right? Okay.
Sort of, yeah, because I'm seeing like, will there be any more EIDL grants?
So again, there is a grant that you can apply for at this time, period. Okay. The funds that Congress authorized were to make whole people that missed it and applied last year that were not able to benefit fully the first time around. Okay. And it is our anticipation that those funds will be exhausted way before we get to anybody that can apply for a new EIDL loan. Okay. That's why there's not going to be, at least at this point, any way to apply for the advance.
A couple of questions about this round of PPP. Is it the same application as the last time? If people were denied the last time, should they go for it again, either for EIDL or PPP?
So let me answer EIDL first. If you were declined for an EIDL loan, you may not reapply. You may request reconsideration of your application. Okay, so the EIDL, it never went away, the EIDL loan. Okay, if you were declined due to whatever reason, if you would have been provided with a reason, and if you have additional documentation to correct your application, right, or mitigating circumstances or what have you, you can provide such documentation. Okay, your decline letter would have told you why you were declined, right? And you could submit any documentation. There's an email address and everything. If somebody has questions about, it's not clear to them why they were declined. Okay, we may be able to, provide some insight, but that's how the EIDL works. You cannot reapply. You can only apply for one EIDL loan per disaster. Okay, and that's it.
So the other question that I've seen a few times is, what if you started your business in 2020 and you don't have that look back period that's required? How would people in that situation fare? Yeah,
so still talking about economic injury disaster loans. You have to have been in operation, I think, for EIDL prior to January 31st. Okay, meaning in turn, you would have to be able to substantiate revenues and expenses, over some period of time prior to that. Okay, and be able to document it accordingly. If you're not fully in operation for an entire year, you could have projected, right? You know, what annualized what your revenues would and expenses were over the period you were in operation. Okay, you could have done that before. You can still do it now for the EIDL loan. Okay, so it's a matter of, you know, punching in the right numbers. If you weren't fully operational, to you know, show what the annualized amount would have been had you been in operation the entire period. Okay, so it's more than just putting in whatever was on your Schedule C in that scenario. You want to annualize that, right? Because that's what the application asks for: 2019 gross revenues or cost of goods sold. Now for PPP, a little bit more convoluted. Okay, so this is a good question. I'm glad it was asked. Okay. And it's probably because the sharp item, well, no, I mentioned it, you know, you can now rely on 2019 or 2020 to compute your PPP loan, right? So, you know, what that means is, you know, it's perhaps, yes, you know, if I say that, you know, if you were unable to benefit from you know, last year's PPP because you had no payroll, in 2019, it's not that you were declined, okay, or that you were unqualified. It's that you had no numbers that you could use to compute a loan amount, okay? So that's actually the way to think about it. Now, you may have numbers that you can use to compute a worthwhile loan amount, okay, since you can refer to 2020. I'm certain that's going to be beneficial for businesses that, you know, you started on January 15th, right? You know, and you maybe didn't have payroll by February 15th. You simply must document that you were in operation prior to February 15th, 2020 for the Paycheck Protection Program. Document you were in operation. What does that mean? Well, our interim final rule that is, you know, dozens and dozens of pages for the Paycheck Protection Program says by submitting invoice, bank statement, or other business record. And that's all it says. So you do have to be able to document something, right, that you were in operation. And with the new flexibility from the Economic Aid Act, you can then, if you can document that, rely on 2020 payroll. So I think that kind of answers the question in that scenario, right? Not enough to make it worthwhile, or didn't have any money, right, up before that. Same with sole proprietors. You know, you had no net income in 2019 because, you know, you couldn't file a Schedule C, right? So essentially, you know, you could not compute a loan amount for a sole proprietor with no employees if you did not have Schedule C from 2019. Well, now you can look at 2020, right? You have a whole year of operation now, right? Now, I will say that you do have to still document, well, if it's a first draw PPP loan, you don't have to document anything. You just have to certify that you need the funds for your continued operation. Might be a little bit tougher for some of those businesses to get a second draw PPP loan because, again, we'll do the math here. Theoretically, you know, we're halfway into January. There's 10 weeks left in the program. If you got a PPP first draw loan tomorrow and you were able to spend it over 8 weeks, I don't see anything in the rules that says you couldn't apply for a second draw loan halfway through March before the subject to funds being available prior to the March 31st expiration of the program. So, but then you'd still have to be able to document that 25% revenue decline. It gets, you know, a little bit more complicated, but getting a little bit in the weeds, but it was a good question. I hope I answered it.
There's also a couple of questions about, so people are saying that there's a question on the PPP application about refinancing their EIDL.
Yeah, so
is that a thing that you want to address real quick?
Very, very specific question, and it's not for refinancing, it's refinancing an EIDL loan you received prior to April 3rd of 2020. And that is because the PPP program did not exist prior to April 3rd, 2020. And there's a very, very small number of businesses that received an economic injury disaster loan for the pandemic in, you know, the 2.5 weeks or so that the pandemic authorization for COVID was in place. Those businesses must refinance that EIDL loan that they received prior to April 3rd on their PPP loan. And it's kind of, we kind of touched on that concept of duplicating the purposes, and you could not have avoided duplicating purposes if you received an EIDL loan prior to April 3rd, because the Paycheck Protection Program didn't exist, and there's no way to assert that, oh, I wasn't going to spend it on payroll. That's not something, a certification you can make, because PPP program didn't exist. Does not mean you cannot have both funds, okay, or both programs after April 3rd. It just means you can't duplicate the funds. So if you have say you got a PPP loan today and an EIDL loan tomorrow, okay, you should not use the EIDL loan funds to pay for anything that you're using your PPP funds to pay for. That would be duplicating the purposes of the loans. You can't do that. So, so for most people, unless you got an EIDL loan prior to April 3rd, 2020, you can ignore that. You can't do anything with it. The answer is no, I did not have an EIDL loan prior to April 3rd, 2020. And if you're one of those, it's in the 5 figures, right, of people that got that out of the 16 million loan applications, you can call me, I'll talk you through it.
Couple more quick questions. Well, nothing's ever quick because there's a lot of explanation to it. A couple of people have asked about the 25% reduction, and that's the comparable. If you could just get into that real quick. I mean, some of it's probably really specific, but.
Yeah, so you're looking at gross revenues for your business and all affiliated entities. So something to keep in mind, that this concept of affiliation, if you have multiple businesses, that's an important thing in the SBA world. That's why we talk about it for eligibility. This is part of eligibility. So we're talking about gross revenues for all of your businesses, okay? Doesn't matter if you're applying for each business individually, it's in aggregate that we're talking about. So with that in mind, in terms of computing gross revenues, or gross receipts, I should say, it's fairly straightforward whether you're a for-profit or not-for-profit concern, right? There's a number you put on your Schedule C for business. There's a number you put on your 990, right? And on your financial statements that shows your revenues, okay? That's the easy, 1 year example that I gave. If you're looking at quarterly, again, a little bit more complicated because now you're comparing, these shorter periods. Okay, if you have good financials that are accountant prepared, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, right? You do have to be able to document it though. Okay, in aggregate. So, and it is a very simple formula. It's just comparing those two numbers. If you made $100,000 in 2019. But 75 in 2020, that's a 25% revenue decline, right? I mean, that's the math we're talking about here, okay? Without going into the super nuanced data, but the interim final rule for the Paycheck Protection Program on page 21, is where that, all those scenarios about gross receipts was where that starts. And I know that because, I sent somebody an email the other day, so it just stuck in my head. I didn't see the question, but, I don't know if that kind of covers it. I hope it does.
You want to keep going? We're coming up on 4:45.
I want to be respectful of people's time, but I'm also happy to kind of stick around and answer questions. And I don't even recall what we budgeted for this time. This is my last one. I don't have another PPP webinar today, so I'll defer to our hosts.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's up to me, but if you guys want to keep going, jump on and let us know. There's actually an interesting question. There's a person on who is an LLC but pays all of his employees as 1099s. Can they get PPP?
Well, they can get PPP. Can they include their 1099 expenses in computing their PPP loan amount? The answer is no, because contractors are not employees. They are their own business owners in their own rights. they are eligible for the PPP program in and of themselves for their compensation as self-employed individuals. Okay, so we've gotten this question a lot, but I mean it's a fundamental concept that somebody that you pay as a 1099 is not an employee, right? For whatever reason, due to your industry or chosen practice, you've chosen not to treat them as employees. So the answer is no. You're still eligible for your own compensation. Based on your net earnings for 2019 or 2020, you can compute a PPP loan based on that. And for any employees that you have on as payroll, that you have as actual payroll.
You're going to get a lot of SVO questions coming your way, and we appreciate all of them. One that kind of stuck out to me was there's a person on here who's a property owner landlord trying to take advantage of the programs. Are they eligible for PPP or EIDL or anything along those lines?
Yeah, for sure. They're a business concern. If they had gross revenues and cost of goods sold that they can use, from their Schedule C or from their tax return, then there's numbers that can be computed for an economic injury disaster loan. Similarly, their income is from rents. If they file a Schedule C and that rental income, it's a business, it's a real business, then they have a Schedule C, right? So there's something to compute a loan amount from. I think that's about the extent. There's nothing outside of that, but I'm certainly aware that it's some businesses maybe don't file a Schedule C. People that have residential rents, right? They use some other method. You don't. In that case, the answer would be no, because you can't produce the documentation necessary, right? So it's a little nuanced, but it isn't that you own rental properties. It's that you can't provide the documentation that it specifically says you must, right?
A lot of these questions are repeats of things we got to, a long time ago. So again, we're going to get all these questions answered, put it together in a document for everybody that will get sent out once it's all set. Want to bring back our host organizations on camera to wrap things up then. Here we go. Anybody? There we go.
Busy answering questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of great questions, a lot of good specific questions that would have taken a lot of time to answer, but we will get those answers for you guys.
Well, there is one I just saw here. How do you find out if your neighborhood qualifies? You're in a low-income neighborhood. When we approach launching that, again, all prior EIDL applicants will be notified. Hey, there's an EIDL. There's more money. Here's what's going to happen. There will be a tool on our website like you could type in your address. So that's my understanding, is that will become available. So no need to ask me for updates. If you applied, you're going to get the update directly from the Office of Disaster Assistance. So that was a good one. That was it. Sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
No, very good. So as Melanie mentioned, we're going to make sure we get the answers to you. If you do not hear from us and have a specific question that came up that you didn't ask, please feel free to reach out directly to your host organization. I know that we have folks that are attending that are associated with the Wise Women's Business Center, with the Better Business Bureau, and also with Upstate Minority Economic Alliance. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off, but know that you will continue to be in good hands if you send your questions our way. Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate the time.
Absolutely, Megan. Anytime.